Okay, so we are now recording. Welcome everyone to our second webinar in our CASA Choices series. We want to thank everyone for registering and logging in tonight. We wanted to remind everyone that this webinar is being recorded and will be posted to our website, which is casaofthetenth.org afterwards. We also want to remind everyone that there will be a survey posted after the presentation so we can get your feedback.
Now I'd like to introduce our presenter for tonight. Please welcome Bryce Gore, who's an instructor in game art at Bradley University. Just a little bit about Bryce. He is a digital 3D and 2D artist who's been working in the industry since 2012. After completing his bachelor's degree in simulation, animation, and gaming at Eastern Michigan University, he started his career working as a 3D modeling and visualization artist at 3D Excite, working with companies like General Motors, Honda, Beechcraft, New Balance, and more. He has also worked on projects for Ford, Lexus, Volkswagen, and Maserati. Shortly after that, he received a master's degree in technology management from EMU and started teaching there as an adjunct lecturer in the simulation, animation, and gaming program. He now teaches full-time at Bradley University and continues to develop the game art degree program. Beautiful visual effects from movies, video games, and still renders are the primary source for Bryce's inspiration. We're really glad and excited to have Bryce here tonight, and with that, I'm going to turn it over to him.
Cool. Thank you, Kyle. Can you guys see my monitor?
Nope. Are you sharing your screen?
Oh, okay. Hold on one second. Okay, can you see it now?
Yep, you're good.
Awesome. So my name is Bryce, and today I'm just going to talk about the game art industry, I guess. Brief overview. We'll look at some pipeline stuff, and then I'll talk a little bit about my experience. Okay, so that's me. Okay, so the primary goal of game art is to create beautiful worlds and environments and characters. But that's not the only thing we have to think about when we're creating game art or really any art. Game art is specific. It has a purpose. So when we're creating art for video games, we have to take several factors into consideration. So here's some of those factors. We have to create clarity because video games are interactive. Oftentimes they're fast paced. We have to display the visual information in a way that a player can quickly understand what's going on. So that's super important to game art. We need to create player satisfaction. So the best way to explain this is if we look at the example of Mortal Kombat 11, you can see how the character Sonya is landing her punches. We have beautiful visual effects to show the power behind the punch. We have his spit coming out to show how powerful her punch is as well. And if you could hear the audio, when those punches land and connect, it creates a satisfying experience that the player created a successful combo. So to create player satisfaction is a huge part of game art as well. We always need to define a style. It's kind of tricky when you're first starting out, but there are many different art styles out there. And so when you're creating a game, you want to make sure the style is cohesive. So if we look at the bottom image, you can see we have 3 different games that are the same genre. They're battle royale. But each one, PUBG, Apex, and Fortnite, has a very distinct art style. And even if we didn't have the logos on there, you would probably be able to tell the games, or you definitely would be able to tell the games apart, and down to even like which game is which just by the art style. So that's another important thing we need to consider when we're creating artwork for games. And ultimately, this goes with any art style. You want to be a visual storyteller. So this means even if you're just making like a hammer that sits on the desk, you should probably put a little bit of effort into thinking about the backstory of that prop. Um, is it worn? How old is it? Is it brand new? Because that kind of information is going to tell us what kind of textures, what kind of material, or how beat up is the object going to be, for example. So if you give everything in your scene, your environments, your props, your characters, if you think of a little backstory for those, and you're able to tell that story through visuals, that's just going to make your the artwork for the game stand out above the rest. So all this stuff is kind of like a broad scope, and it can actually cover various elements of creating game art, because even though game art is more specific than game design, or creating a video game, it's still pretty broad because there are specific sectors in game art, and we'll take a look at that next, I believe. So now we're going to look at roles, types of roles in the game art industry. We have 2D concept artists. So a 2D concept artist is going to be the person who creates stuff from scratch, really. They'll be given a prompt from a script or maybe the mechanics of the game, and they will come up with fantastical creatures, environments, and props to kind of fit those game mechanics and written prompts. So yeah, they're really like the first step in the pipeline, and all the pipeline is like a series of events from start to finish. In case you don't know what pipeline is, so yeah, they're kind of the first step in the pipeline, and that's where you work out problems and you do a lot of different iterations to really get the look that's going to work with your game. And then we also have 2D artists for illustration. So this is going to be a more refined 2D artwork, whereas concept artists, they're kind of getting stuff out fast. So it's not going to be as polished, as fine-tuned. But for art for illustration, we're making the final art piece that's either going to be promotional material, the cover of a game, board game assets, and assets on trading cards. Those are all polished 2D artworks for illustration. So now we're going to step into the realm of 3D, and this is where I kind of live. And the 3D, there's a lot of different aspects, and to create a asset from start to finish, just looking at 3D, it's very involved, and we'll look at that a little bit later. But these are some of the things that we can break up 3D artwork into. And the first one is props and assets. These are going to be things that characters interact with, things that lay around the world, such as like tables, chairs, knives, weapons. Sometimes some studios you work for, they can have you focus on, hey, you're a weapons artist. So weapons artist is kind of like a specialized props artist. Okay, and then we can be, there's a role called vehicle artist. Sometimes a prop artist is the vehicle artist. It really, a lot of these jobs are intertwinable sometimes, depending on the size of the studio you're working for. So if you work for like a really big AAA company like EA, you're probably going to be more specialized. Whereas if you're working on an independent game studio with like 5 people, then you're going to be expected to kind of put more hats on and go into different roles. So basically vehicle artists is kind of more specialized prop artists, but they specialize in vehicles. Next, we have an environment artist, and the environment artist actually works with the level designer closely when it comes to games. And an environment artist actually will create the world. They'll create props that are more needed for the environment, and some of the special things that environment artists have to focus on is creating things like the foliage, really focusing on the lighting of the world, and creating materials that are really efficient for the game engine, so you're not wasting a whole lot of calculation space. And yeah, that's the environment artist. So the level designer will typically be the person in the game engine, kind of placing out stuff where they want the player to go, how they want the player to move through the world. And then they'll work closely with the environment artist, and the environment artist will dump in all the beautiful assets that fit with the level designer's kind of path they want the character to follow. Then my favorite character or creature artist. So this person's responsible for creating characters and creatures. It's pretty competitive to get into character art. A lot of people want to do it. So it's probably one of the most competitive roles within game art. And some things you have to think about when you want to be a character artist is you have to have good anatomy, understanding of anatomy. Clothes, those can be tricky to create. And hair is also really tricky to create for a game. And then we have technical artists. Now, these people kind of bridge the gap between programming and the art side because they're dealing with a lot of stuff that's more numbers driven, I'd say, more technical. So on the image on the left, you can see this would be specifically a rigging artist within the technical artist field. And they create the bones for the character that allows us to make them move. A lot of the times they'll do kind of this crazy math stuff that I'm not going to get into to create like really unique shaders and they really work on the interaction too. So if I have a character, I need to make the character move when I press W, jump when I hit spacebar. So the technical artist will link those animations up in engine to like key functions. So that's something a technical artist would kind of do too. And then a big thing is visual effects, particle systems and stuff. And that's what we see right here. Usually a technical artist will do this too, but this one is kind of more on the art side too. But yeah. And then we have animation, and animation kind of crosses like all fields when it comes to 3D because they use it for commercials, film, video games. But and there's like actual programs just dedicated to just animation, because once you understand those fundamentals, like the 12 principles of animation, then you will be able to apply those principles to like 2D, 3D, digital 3D, and sprite animations. So that's all I want to say about animation. And then there's kind of what I do, I guess, is you're more of a generalist. You can dabble in a little bit of everything. But if you kind of know you want to go into vehicle design or create vehicle assets and stuff, then it's never, I would say it's not too early to start thinking about that, because a lot of studios do like to see like you're specialized and stuff. But at the same time, there's nothing wrong with being a generalist, as long as your portfolio is decent. Okay, so let's look at the kind of pipeline for creating a 3D asset. So this is pretty much as easy and simple as the pipeline gets. So first we have our 3D model. And what that is it's a series of polygons or faces in 3D space. And I have Maya open. So I just want to explain this real quick because there's a lot of terminology that you guys might not be familiar with. So here we have like a face, and each face is made up of edges, and those edges connect to points in 3D space, a vertice. So what we can do when we model something, we'll start with a cube like this. And then when we need to start building like curvature or something, we can just cut in more edges. So let's say I want to make an arc at the top. We can cut in more edges. Oops. Messing up my key bindings. And we can start moving them. So pretty much at its core, modeling is pretty simple. You're just taking these faces, edges, and vertices, and you're manipulating them with a move tool, a rotate tool, or a scale tool. And it gets a lot more complicated, obviously, but at its core, when you're first starting off, that's what you're going to be working with. You're going to be manipulating those things. So after we create our 3D model, what we do is we need to do something called UV unwrapping. And what this is a way of flattening out our 3D model into 2D space, so we can use a software like Photoshop to paint 2D flat textures that are then kind of morphed back onto our 3D object. If you think about like a rug that's made out of an animal, they'll cut the belly of the animal and splay it out, and that's kind of what UV unwrapping is. If we look back into Maya, we can kind of see that here. So I am actually going to undo, so it's simplified. But what we do is we have our 3D model. And you can also think about this like origami, right? When you create a cube, you print out a piece of paper, you cut it, and then you fold it into a box. We're kind of doing the reverse of that when we're unwrapping. So this is what we get. And then here's an example of our 2D texture, just this checkerboard. And you can see we have letters and numbers. And you can see those letters and numbers correspond to a space in 3D. So if we move it on our 2D space, you can see we're picking up the different information from that 2D texture. And that's what unwrapping is. And usually when I'm teaching students, that's the kind of one of the trickiest things to wrap your head on if you're not used to it. So then after we have our model unwrapped, we can then texture it. So I just use Photoshop and create these textures. And then what you do is you get into your rendering software, whether that's your game engine or like a real-time viewer, and you apply those textures that you created back onto your 3D model. You light it pretty, and then you kick out an image like this. So that's the simplest version of the pipeline. And things do get pretty complicated though. So this is going to be kind of an overview of the process for creating a game asset. And this is like the more standard way, how like your not traditional, but how current gen assets are created. So first off, we always want to start with a nice concept, and you want to make sure you have reference. The key thing when you're doing any kind of art, whether it's game art or traditional art, painting, you want to make sure you have really good reference. You don't want to just go from your memory because you're going to miss a lot. Now, if you're like 20 years in, you still want to use reference, but then you might use less reference, I'd say. But reference is a huge part of the process that often gets overlooked. Here you can see we modeled using those techniques I just showed you guys, this axe. And then what we can also do is, if you notice how kind of clunky it was, like moving those edges and faces around, it's kind of technical, right? And as an artist, you want to be able to kind of just get in there with your hands more and move stuff around. So there's this software called ZBrush, and what we can do is we can basically take that model, and you're not really converting it to digital clay, but you can make it act like digital clay. But you have to add a lot more of those polygons and stuff to get it to basically carve in this nice little detail. So if I show you guys ZBrush real quick, you can see we have this cube. And oops, sorry. It's kind of hard to see, but it's made up of these polygons. In ZBrush, you're not really selecting the edges, vertices, and faces like we were in Maya, but we have these brush tools and we can sculpt it on there. So if we need more resolution, and this is where I might lose some people, I apologize if that's the case, but say we do this, and you can kind of see those little squares, right? So those are the faces that we were kind of playing with in Maya. And then in ZBrush, what we can do is we can divide it or add more faces, and we can get a smoother result. And this will also let us sculpt in smoother detail. So we can create like a little face. There we go. So I love ZBrush. It's a really fun program, and it's more freeing to kind of explore ideas and stuff and really just move the geometry around. But I typically will start in Maya, create my base mesh. So I have a foundation that I can bring into ZBrush and then do more free-form organic things. So in this example, you can see like I didn't have that skull in my original model, but in ZBrush, I was able to just push it like clay to create that skull. Okay. So then we go through the process. There's one more step that we typically have to do. And because that resolution was so high, we had so many of those faces to get that nice smooth detail in ZBrush. What we have to do for a game engine is we have to bring the number of those polygons way back down so it's optimized for our game engine so it runs smoothly. So what we do is we do something called retopology, and we optimize the mesh. We make it so it will run within a game. We take that, we do the unwrapping thing. And what we can do is we can take those two, the optimized model with the high resolution sculpt, and we can project that detail onto the optimized mesh. And so that's how we can kind of get that detail back, but retain the lower resolution model that's going to work nicely in our game. Then we go through the texturing process. So not only when you texture, not only are you creating like the kind of base color, but you have to think about these as materials. So is the wood metal or non-metal? Well, it's not metal. So we have something called a metalness map, where black is a non-metallic material and white is a metallic material. So that's what you're seeing in this map. And then we have other maps too. So one example is a roughness map. How sharp or how blurry are those reflections? So you can see here, kind of where the edges of the axe are. The roughness is black because I wanted those to be more beat up and less reflective. So that's what that kind of means. So that's kind of complicated too, but basically texturing phase, you're creating the maps that are going to plug in to your material. Speaking of plugging into your material, you can take your asset, your model, into a software like Marmoset, which is a real-time render engine. So what a real-time render engine is, it's an engine that runs in real time, obviously, but you get immediate feedback just like you would for a game, essentially. And so what you do is you have this material and you plug all those maps in so all those texture maps we created in the previous step work together to create this beautiful material. Then you light it. You might do some post-processing, like add a little bloom, a little glow around it, and you call it a day. So that was like a pretty quick overview of like the process of how most game assets are made. And when you're a character artist, you're doing the same thing, but you'll have some special steps like, oh, I got to create the hair. Well, there's a slightly different workflow for how you create the hair. Okay, so I think I got a little bit of time. So let me talk about my journey real quick. So when I was in high school, I had no idea this stuff existed. I played video games and I saw the pretty artwork and visual effects from film, but it never clicked to me like this was a career opportunity that I could pursue. Throughout my whole life, I've always like doodled, sketched. I did 2D art on traditional pen and paper. But other than that, I didn't really know this was a career option. In my head, I was like, well, I'm not that good of a 2D artist. That's a super competitive field. So realistically, I know I'm not going to be an artist. So right after high school, I went to Washtenaw Community College for 3 years while I tried to figure out what I wanted to do. And I was just doing the general education courses like your maths, your Englishes, sciences, because those typically will transfer into bigger universities easily. And I needed to fulfill a couple more credits to get my associate's degree. It's been so long, I forgot what that associate's degree was in. It was like networking. That's what it was. Hooking up computer networks and stuff like that. So my last semester, I needed some more credits, and I ended up taking a class that was an introduction to Photoshop, class that was an introduction to Illustrator, and one class that was creating like 2D games. Um, the game one was fun to me, but really I got the most that semester out of the Photoshop and Illustrator stuff because I was like, hey, I really love computers. And I love art, and this is just awesome. At the time, by this time, I figured out I was going to go to a school called Michigan Technological University. I'm from Michigan. I don't know if I mentioned that. So it's all the way up in the Upper Peninsula, 10 hours from where I was. But that's what I wanted to do, computer engineering. Um, so when I did this, I was having a lot of fun in Photoshop and Illustrator. So while I was at Michigan Tech, I didn't take any classes that were art related at all. I was doing engineering stuff, signal analysis kind of stuff, and it was decent. It wasn't like mind-blowingly fun. I did learn a lot. And I do think having a little bit of an engineering background has helped me out in my career. When people see that. But while I was there, the important thing is in my downtime, I picked up photography as a hobby, and I think photography and when you're doing 3D art, game art, it's super beneficial. It just helps build your kind of visual library, and it helps train your eyes, visual perception, I guess, on things. And while I was at Michigan Tech, not only was I doing photography, I was also still really loosely dabbling in Photoshop and Illustrator. So I come home one summer, 2 years into my computer engineering degree, and my wife's sister's boyfriend tells me about this program at Eastern. Eastern is literally 5 minutes away from like my parents' house when I was in college. So I was like, oh, that's cool. He was saying, hey, I know you like art. I know you like computers. I'm going there to do something called simulation, animation, and gaming. That was the name of the program. And he's like, I think you should check it out. So I checked it out. I told my mom about it because it was a big change, you know. I sunk a lot of money into Michigan Tech. It was kind of expensive. So my mom was hesitant about doing a hard pivot so late in my college career because I've been in college probably 5 years by this point. So it took me a while to get through college. And that's why I try to tell my students, I'm like, sometimes stuff takes time. But after she talked to some people and saw how the benefits of like what you can do with this stuff, she really was behind me. Not to say she wasn't behind me before, but like after talking to people, that's when she was like, okay, yeah, I'm definitely down for you to go for this. So this is some of my student work, my early student work, going through that program. And it's not the best, but I think it's important to kind of see the journey. So after I graduated, getting my bachelor's in simulation, animation, and gaming, I worked for a company called 3D Excite, and in that company, I was new. Luckily, so typically, I was hired to kind of take the engineering CAD data. So remember how I said, oh, my engineering data background might have helped? Well, I'd experience with CAD because I was doing computer engineering and stuff. I had to take engineering classes. So I got hired in there as a data prep specialist. They would get the engineering data from GM. And what my job was going to be was to pull out each and every screw that you don't see during for the final shot, because all that data just makes the render, creating that final image, slower and slower. But luckily they got a big project in and they needed help modeling, so I got to do the 3D modeling, that first step, creating the mesh, and that was super rewarding. But a lot of my job was making stickers for buttons. In this Seed Hawk project, I literally just ran these hoses. That's my contribution to this project. In this project, my contribution was, set up this lighting, set up the environment, and kind of light the scene, but we're going to give it to somebody else and they're going to make the lighting so much sweeter anyway. So that was kind of like my early jobs. It was definitely fun and I got to learn a lot of stuff. So yeah, I did contract work for a company called Jackson Dawson, their biggest client being Ford, and then EView 360, their biggest client being Ford as well, kind of dealerships, and their other biggest client was Maserati. So here's some stuff later on in my career that I had more kind of control over. So we did these nice Lincoln interior renders. I was responsible for creating the material, setting up the lighting, doing the composition, rendering it. But this is all stuff that was engineering data that was cleaned up by the modeling artist, because engineering data for the seats looks pretty bad. So to kind of give it that soft look, they'll kick that off to the modeling artist to kind of give it that soft look. But I was responsible for the visualization aspect. So texturing materials, lighting, composition. In this project, I actually did modeling, and this was like one of the early projects I actually worked on. So me and another person worked on creating all this from scratch. This Maserati was just a render I did. So I did the materials, lighting, and rendering. And as well as this Ford hub, this is actually the store that's in the New World Trade Center. If you go like downstairs, I actually got to check it out. So that was pretty cool. But this was when they were concepting that space, and I was responsible for, again, materials, lighting, and rendering. Oops. So during this time, I was getting my master's degree, and I really wanted to kind of give back to my school. So I started teaching as an adjunct. I really grew to love teaching, and that's kind of where my career is now. So I've taught at Eastern Michigan University. After I eventually picked up a full-time position at Fair State University in Michigan, and now I work full-time at Bradley University. So here you can just see some examples. I think it's cool to see like some examples from students I've had. So you can see this was like Aaron's first project after his first class with me that freshman year. And this is kind of where he's at now. And Aaron actually works for Blizzard, the company that makes WoW, Diablo, and Overwatch. And he's an environment artist there. So he's working on the new Diablo. He's worked on the new WoW Shadowlands DLC that dropped. And hopefully he works on Overwatch too. That's like one of my, I keep bugging him, like, tell me something about Overwatch 2. And he's like, I can't say anything. So that's frustrating, but understandable. And then here's another student kind of after his first semester with me. And this is where he's at now. And Jacob's actually just graduated, and he's looking for a job right now. And he actually has an interview with Turn 10 Studio, the people who make Forza Motorsport. So that's pretty exciting. So yeah, I think to kind of showcase like what I can do as a teacher, it's best just let the students' work speak for themselves. And here's my current projects, I guess, my up-to-date portfolio. So it's, hopefully you can tell it's vastly improved from my time as a student, but you can see like how I think this was over the span of probably like 3 years. Some of these projects are later. So anywhere from 3 years after high school to, or not high school, excuse me, 3 years after graduating college to 5 years, I'd say. But it just takes time. A lot of this stuff takes time. You have to fine tune your eye. You have to pick up little tricks and techniques here and there, because no matter how good the school is that you go to, nothing beats just that experience of going through the grind yourself, digging for information yourself, because school's not going to be able to tell you everything. Students have varying different skill levels, so you kind of have to cater to kind of the middle of the pack, because that's where most students land. And so it's kind of hard to push everybody to really be where they need to be once they get into industry. So the biggest thing is like, you just got to put time into this. If this is what you're passionate about, you really love it, and you really want to succeed, you got to put time into it to research, do studies. Like if you're going into character art, you can do like weekly studies and stuff like that to practice the anatomy and stuff like that. I still do 2D stuff. My 2D stuff is not nearly as good as my 3D stuff though, because I do the 3D stuff more. But I think the fundamentals of like color, lighting and stuff, if you can start practice that in 2D, well, that's going to aid you when you do 3D assets for like games. And I still do photography. I love it. I haven't done it that much since the whole pandemic thing, but I still do love photography. Okay, so that's almost the end of my presentation. Some things for you guys though is you can download this program called Blender and it's free. And there's lots of resources online. So I also linked some resources to Blender, some good starter videos that if this is something that interests you, it's never too early to start learning. And then if you come to somebody like me, I don't teach Blender, I teach Maya. I'll be like, oh, we're completely learning Maya now. But the nice thing is you understand those concepts of like moving the vertices around, shaping the models. All those concepts are like the fundamentals. And the software you use, there's some cases where like, yeah, we're not going to sculpt in Maya, we're going to use ZBrush for that. But for the most part, it's like, oh, if we're building on a model, Blender's the same as as Maya. It's just where those tools and what are they called, and typically they're called the same thing. So I really encourage you guys, if this is something cool, grab Blender for free and start playing with it. Lots of resources online too. Okay, and then tips for artists. So reference, and more reference. I came in late to the game. I used to think Pinterest was just for my mom for like decorations and stuff, but Pinterest has a lot of good references and resources for artists. So don't sleep on Pinterest. It's a pretty good website for artists. Go beyond the classroom if you really want to master your craft. Don't wait to be showed things. If you have an interest in something, don't say, oh, well, I take a class on that like 2 years from now. Start getting into it as soon as you're interested in. The more time you can put into your craft, the better you'll be for it. So spend time working on small, quick studies versus going all in on the larger project. So again, I'll kind of circle back to characters. If you haven't created a character before, you should probably do smaller studies. It's better to spend a week creating hundreds and hundreds of different hands and different poses, because you're doing a lot of the problem solving multiple times and you're doing it a lot quicker than if you spend a whole week trying to make one perfect hand. I think there's a lot more learning that happens when you are doing the iterative process. Like, okay, I'm going to do like 5 hands today. I'll do 20 hands tomorrow. But if you just work on one, the process is a lot slower. When it comes to your portfolio, you should be thinking quality over quantity. It's better to have like 1 to 2 solid pieces than 100 pieces. There's there's no shortcut for putting in the time. Get feedback on your artwork, especially when you're working on it. Don't wait until the end. I've been guilty of this. And then you want to kick yourself because somebody points something out and you're like, well, I'm not going to go back. I just sunk like 2 weeks into this project. But had you've gotten feedback throughout the course of you working on it, you can implement it on the fly. And it's like, oh yeah, I'll have to change it, but I'm only losing like a half hour's worth of work, versus at the end where it's like, well, I needed that information a week ago. So this is something I asked my friends and some students if they had any words of wisdom that they think I should relay. And so this is from Aaron, the student who I showed you who works at Blizzard, but he says, always be self-critiquing your work. You can't rely on other people to always tell you what's wrong. You got to be able to get 80% of the way there yourself. So I think that's super important, just being self-reflecting and self-critical. Yeah, any questions?
Thanks so much, Bryce. That was super interesting. Really had my attention the whole time, and I definitely learned a lot.
Oh,
So,
awesome.
we're gonna just give everyone a moment if they have questions to drop them in the Q&A box. We don't have any in there yet, and I'm sure it's because everyone was so engaged in the presentation. They didn't want to take the time to type
For
out
sure.
questions. So we'll give people a couple minutes to type their questions in there. I actually had a question for you. Maybe you could answer this while we're waiting for people to type their questions. What could you tell us about the program at Bradley, and what are some of the advantages that the program at Bradley has compared to maybe some
Oh,
other schools?
definitely. Well, I'm there. That's the biggest. I'm just kidding. No, but
Obviously.
for real, I think at Bradley, and the thing, because I worked at Ferris and I came to Bradley, and I wouldn't have left Ferris because that was a really nice job if I didn't see the hunger for Bradley to really want to grow the program to cater to their students and really get them the information they need to succeed in this industry. That's what drew me to Bradley. There's faculty there. We have our game design. One of our game design instructors been in the industry for like 50 years, so he's just a wealth of knowledge. And like I'm teaching a class with him. I'm just because I've just used to, before I came here, I was like, oh, I just make pretty pictures, but I'm really learning more about like kind of what it is to make a game. So I think that's the main advantage of Bradley is the faculty and the willingness for the program to grow. They're not afraid to take chances. But yeah, those are the main advantages.
Awesome.
I have a question. I have zero experience in this area, so we appreciate you sharing those resources, especially the free ones,
Yeah.
for our budding artists. But I was wondering, with the ZBrush and the Maya programs that you mentioned, I think based off what you said that they're likely to use them in college, correct?
Yeah. So different studios, like there's a couple more other ones, software packages out there, 3ds Max, Cinema 4D, Blender, Maya, and they all those ones kind of serve the same function, and different studios use different ones, so it kind of sucks. So it's like who's teaching it kind of would the you like okay, excuse me. So at Ferris we taught 3ds Max, at Eastern we taught 3ds Max. When I came here to develop the game art program, I was like, well, I'm quicker in Maya and I see more use cases for Maya, so I teach Maya. So it's kind of, you would want to do your research when you're looking at colleges to see what they use. I can tell you right now, a lot of colleges will I'll let you use Blender as long as you understand the fundamentals of making a good model. But I think it's you just got to be able to be adaptable, because the software standards change so quickly anyway. The whole pipeline could like be completely different if I gave this talk next year, right? We could be doing different things. So you have to be adaptable. And if you come in using Blender, just learn the software that your school's teaching anyway, because chances are the studio is going to be using 3ds Max or Maya versus Blender anyway, because Blender's still kind of gaining in popularity. I will say, if you have a student email, you can get Maya for free with a student email. You can, in ZBrush, it's like $40 a month, but you can get like a 30-day trial. Or ZBrush specifically, they have a sister program. I believe it's called ZBrush Core, or it's called Sculptress. It's like a watered down version, but it lets you get in there and kind of play with the clay and stuff. So that's a good one. I think it's Sculptress is the free ZBrush one. So
Awesome. So we do have one question in the Q&A box. Let me read it to you and then give you a chance to respond. I think this is from one of our other CASA staff, but they ask, how important is math when learning these methods? Having taught geometry, I used to bribe my students with the knowledge they learned through math to aid them in the gaming world.
yeah, I will say if you're going into game programming, math is a must. It's the most critical skill you need. I've heard programmers like talking to each other. I'm like, oh, I'm glad I don't have to do that. But the kind of, when I'm doing like 3D art, like especially when I was doing automotive stuff, I need to know like diameter, radius, how to figure out stuff, because when you model like the tread on the tire, you want to lay it out flat so it's easier to model, but you need to know like some basic some math to kind of get it to curl in. How many segments do I need to like fill this 360 thing? So my math is super basic that I've encountered when I do this stuff. But when you do game programming and you're a technical artist, you should know math for sure. Like I don't think you can do it without knowing math. So
Cool, thanks. Doesn't look like we have any other questions in there right now.
Awesome.
But if anyone has any more, feel free to post them in there. If we see any pop up, we'll let Bryce answer them. But I will let Bianca and take it from here and kind of wrap things up for us this evening.
Yeah, so again, we just want to remind everyone that we do have a survey that we post after this. So don't close out of your browser because it'll pop up automatically. It's quick, it's 5 questions, so we can get that feedback so we can do more CASA choices that interest everyone. We do want to thank everyone who registered and logged in tonight. We appreciate being involved and the support. And Bryce, again, thank you so much for your time and the resources and your story. This was a wonderful presentation and we cannot wait to post it so more people can see it.
Thanks for having me. I really appreciate the opportunity.